fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. We got Mr. Joe Goldberg in the house today.
I'm in the house. I'm back. I'm on the road. I'm glad to be in the house.
Yeah, it's good.
So traveling the byways and the highways of glorious places like Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa.
Looking for bodies.
Yes, running into the fields, grabbing corn that's not there yet.
It's kind of like your last run, hey? Before.
Yeah, it's great. It's scenic. It's my home areas, Iowa.
Beautiful. And I was going to say, we haven't been on for a while, so I was going to say that, so when we're off, I guess Donald Sutherland died. That was, he's kind of Canadian.
I was posting all over social media, especially Kelly's Heroes pieces. The actors of our youth and my youth, these are...
Pretty shocked. Good actor, really good at pulling off the roles, so many different roles. Yeah, really good. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that. It was good. And let's see, we've got a writer with us. His newest book is called I Will Ruin You. It's a novel. Linwood Barclay, thank you for being here.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Linwood, so are you a Sutherland fan?
I am indeed. I felt really terrible when he passed. It's hard to pick a favorite, but the first one that came to mind was Flute. And, you think that it really feels like Fonda's movie in many ways, but it's named for his character. And he was so held back in that movie, and that's what he was so good at. And the other one that struck me, which is a favorite of mine, is the sci-fi remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Right, yeah.
You picked some good ones.
And that last 5 seconds is just, if that doesn't give you chills, nothing will. It's a great movie. He was in everything. I mean, it's a huge loss. But the gifts that he left us, that we can watch over and over again. He was just magnificent.
Yeah, he got a good run into. He made it to 88, so, but it's sad. Yeah, it's always sad, changing of hands and stuff. But what he did so well was make you really feel for the character, whether you liked him or not, or whatever the case was. He was really able to bring out that character, make you understand the character. And character's really the important thing, isn't it? Sort of how you look at it when you write, is your character your primary object?
Well, I think it is. I mean, I think for me, in many ways, just nailing down the story for me is the most important thing. Like, what is the plot? Where am I going to end up? But once you've kind of got a sense of that, I think it's all about character. I mean, you can have the greatest plot in the world, all the twists in the world, and if the characters are two-dimensional, if they're not believable, the book's just not going to work. But I often have a kind of instant sense of who characters are, and sometimes I guess I make it work, and maybe others I don't know. But I just kind of have an instant sense of who they are and try to be true to that.
Well, I mean, because not only that, if you write a series or if someone else redoes your character, but the character's what make people keep coming back, right? Like Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, yeah. I haven't done a series in a long time. I did the first 4 novels I wrote were about a character named Zach Walker. They were what I would call sort of comic thrillers. And I've had other characters that came back occasionally, but for the most part, I do standalones. So that's, you're starting from the ground up, everything is, you're starting all over again when you do standalones. And I think sometimes it'd be great to do a series because sort of half the work is done. You just need a story for these people that you know. But with standalones, of course, you also have the freedom. You can knock off your lead character if you want because you weren't planning to bring it back anyway.
So do you build your character? You say plot, and then you kind of have an idea of your character. But as you're writing, is your character developing and being built? You don't have them written out.
No, I don't have anything written out. I mean, I just have, like I said, I have that kind of sense, and I think it's true that once you get into the story, you'll start developing your characters more. There have been many books where I went back and felt that the characters weren't rich enough. They didn't have enough shade to them and enough nuance. So I go back and take another run at them. And so I've done that more than once, kind of nail down just who they are and make them so that they're each kind of character has a distinctive voice.
How do you play your secondary characters?
Oh, gosh. I mean, That's an interesting question, only because it's, when you do this for a living, you get asked questions about things that you realize you don't think about. You're like, here's this guy, and here's this person, and they're coming into the story. And if they're secondary, they kind of, sometimes on the spot, you kind of invent something interesting for them or give them a characteristic. But it's not the sort of thing that I am really conscious of or aware of. I just, like I say, it's like my dad used to play the piano, but he couldn't read notes. And he played by ear, and he just kind of, and sometimes maybe that's the way it is when I'm writing. You get to a character, you get to a scene, they always talk about plotters versus pantsers. Do you plot the whole thing out, or do you go back and see your pants? And I fall somewhere in the middle. It's the big picture I want to know. Like, for every writer that I know, there's a different way to go about this. And, a lot of writers I hear say, well, they write the book to find out what's going to happen. And I love surprises, but I want to know kind of the big picture. I always figure you wouldn't build a house without some blueprints and a solid foundation. You can always decide later, what color to paint it and what color the walls will be and what kind of furniture you'll put in there. All those things can change, but the structure to me needs to be sound to begin.
Yeah, I call between a pantser and a planner as a plantser. Yeah, I'm a plantser.
Yeah, that would be me.
I just write and don't wear pants.
That's one way to interpret that.
Well, that's really one of the luxuries of working from home, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really, it's not, it's all optional. Pants optional, all that sort of thing.
So what's the premise of I Will Ruin You? What is the story about?
I Will Ruin You is about a teacher named Richard Boyle, and Richard is in the middle of teaching a class on Cormac McCarthy's novel The Road. He's a high school teacher, and this book, by the way, is not on the curriculum, and he's just figures kids are going to like this a whole lot more than Huck Finn or some other thing that doesn't touch them where they live. These are kids who've been watching The Walking Dead and The Last of Us. And so here's a story that he thinks he could get them interested in, but there's all these larger moral issues to talk about. And right there in the first paragraph, as he's teaching this, he looks out the window and he sees what looks like a former student crossing the parking lot, and he appears to be wearing a dynamite vest. And so Richard tells the kid to lock the place up, lock down, and Richard goes barreling down the hallway because he knows there's a door at the end of that hall that sometimes people leave slightly ajar because they sneak out and have a smoke or whatever. And if that kid gets to that door before he does, he'll be able to get into the school. And without telling much more about that, things end rather badly, but they could have ended a whole lot worse. And Richard is hailed as something of a hero, and this brings a certain amount of notoriety. And not long after that, in the category of no good deed goes unpunished, Richard hears from someone who once went to the school and says, if I told people a little something about you, you might not be the big hero that everybody thinks you are. And now Richard's embroiled in a blackmail scheme that's tied into fentanyl dealing in town and all sorts of mayhem. And it just gets worse and worse for him. And as if that were all bad enough, there's a parents' meeting about why the hell he's teaching The Road when it's not on the curriculum, because there's cannibalism in that book, and that's not very pleasant. And why on earth does the school approve cannibalism? You know what it's like. So Richard's got a lot of problems.
I can't help but think that you have a meaning or a subtext to this, then.
Well, I do. Good old Stephen King, he tweeted about this book 3 times, and one of them was, he said, you get your money's worth, but this is a great filler, but it's got things to say. And so there's a bit of a subplot about trying to ban books in schools and stuff like that. So I will say that just because you're writing a thriller doesn't mean that, if you've got an axe to grind, you can't find a way to do it, in the context of a thriller.
Why a high school teacher? Why is that your character? Is there a reason you went this direction?
Well, I think certainly that the situation that happens in that opening that involves school, that involves a former student, it just, I thought, obviously it's going to be a teacher. It's going to be a person who's in a position of trust and leadership, and then we're going to be faced with the question of, is it possible that someone in that category has something to hide and would have an awful lot to lose if the allegation against them were true. And also, I wrote about a teacher, I think, at least once before in a book called No Time for Goodbye. And most of my main characters, my heroes, are people who are just ordinary people. They're not Jack Reacher types. They're not detectives. They're not, ex-Navy SEALs or anything like that. My heroes have been teachers. One of them was like a landscaper. In a book I wrote called Fear the Worst, my main character, my hero, was a car salesman. Car salesmen are not typically heroic figures, But these are the people that I know. I mean, I know teachers. My wife taught her whole career. I had two friends who sold cars. People who just, so I like to write about people who are in very ordinary occupations who face an extraordinary situation, and they are in no way equipped to deal with the kind of people that they're going to run up against.
And that brings it truer to life and more relatable, isn't it? I mean, for a reader, I think it would.
I think so. I mean, that doesn't mean that you don't love a James Bond thriller or a Jack Reacher thriller. I mean, well, when I read, and I love Lee Child's books, and when Jack Reacher comes up against some people, I'm not worried for him. I'm worried for these other people because he's going to beat the snot out of them, and I'm going to love it, and it's going to be great entertainment. But I'm not particularly worried for my characters. I think readers will find themselves identifying. I want to identify with Jack Reacher. I just love reading it. But people will identify with characters in my book because I think, well, that could conceivably be me. I could be in, I can imagine a situation where I might get in that kind of a mess. And if I did, how on earth would I deal with it? Because I don't have those skills. I don't know how to deal with bad guys.
Well, you're talking about the reader, and I always kind of ask a question because everybody knows I ask questions that help me because I'm writing a new suspense book is, how much do you think about the reader? You answered the social theme question, and they can react to that social theme part of it a certain way. But how do you think of them as you're writing? Are they over your shoulder? You have a long history of writing. You have a fan base. How much are they in your writing?
I don't really think about. How do I put this? I don't really think about the reader in that way. I sort of think, even as I'm writing it, I feel like I'm the first reader. And if I'm not engaged or if I'm getting bored, then whoever picks up this book eventually will be the same. And so as I'm writing it, I'm trying to keep myself engaged. And what can I do at the end of this chapter to just sort of throw in a tiny twist or do something or create a mini cliffhanger? Or what can I do that's a little bit unexpected so that there's always this, oh my gosh, I got to keep going. I have to read the next one. I have to read the next chapter. And so I think that at a sort of subconscious level, I'm thinking about the reader, but I don't write it and think, well, would the reader like this or they're going to like that? I just think, is it working for me? And if it's working for me, then my hope after, 24 books is that it'll work for the reader.
And you're covering pretty sensitive topics, school shooting kind of direction and, the hero kind of having real life issues that can ruin them, and in a way you're kind of getting into a cancel culture because of that. Are you, I don't know, when you touch those subjects, do you kind of think about how and what kind of responses you might get?
Well, yeah, and I'm not overly worried about it. I mean, I spent 30 years working in newspapers, and so a lot of times the topics in the news, subjects that interest me, will find their way into my books. And if you end up writing something that you think is going to offend a reader, whether it somehow touches on a cultural issue, that you may just at the same time pick up another one over here because, okay, you piss this one off, but this one thinks, yeah, that's worth writing about, that's worth discussing or, engaging that issue. I mean, when I did a book a few years ago called Elevator Pitch, in which I created a kind of a sort of obstructionist or difficult, a reactive group that they call themselves the flyovers. And they were the people who lived in the middle of the country and they felt neglected. They felt like everybody on the coasts, on the big cities were running the game and they decided everything. And we were the people that they just flew over as they went back for. And so that was a book that I think was tapping into that kind of a divide that's going on. I didn't get any kind of pushback on it. I just thought, that's what's happening. And so a lot of things that are happening work their way into my books. I mean, in an earlier one, not quite as controversial, but I was writing about a guy who works in a newspaper, and this newspaper is just shrinking. It's going out of business. One of my concerns is the death of newspapers and death of local news coverage. And that found a way to found its way into a thriller. So it's funny, every once in a while you get a reader will say, well, why don't you just stick to writing your thrillers and not write anything about this issue or that? And I think, yeah, that's why we became writers, to keep our opinions to ourselves.
Yeah.
As well, this stuff just comes in. And if you don't like it, then there's lots of other people you can read that, won't offend you.
Was being a newspaper reporter for so long for you, how did that help you become a regular writer? Because people who write, they come from every different background. Everybody can publish right now. And you come from a career of writing, right? So how does that help you write also across the various genres or these types of books that you write, nonfiction and anthologies and things?
And very quickly, I'll tell you, I got my first newspaper job when I was 22. And for the next 4 years in a couple of different papers, I was a reporter. And then in 1981, I was hired by the largest circulation paper in Canada, which is the Toronto Star. And I was hired by them as an editor. I went in and we're trying to get a reporting job, and they said, we got lots of reporters. We're really short of desk people. We're short of editors, copy editors. Do you have a lot of copy editing experience? And I said, sure, which was a lot. And I spent the next 12 years as an editor, assistant city editor, news editor, life section editor, all these kind of things I did. And then in 93, opportunity came up, a gig as a columnist. So I wrote 3 columns a week for the next 14 years. And this was generally opinion. It was alleged to be a humor column, but that's what I did. And so when I finally, and I've been writing novels in my teens and my 20s and was trying to get those published, and we can all be grateful that they weren't. To answer your question, long-winded way, is that what I write about in the books is somewhat influenced by my career in journalism. But what really impacts is the work ethic part. Deadlines mean everything. It's not, when you sit down to go to work, you produce. You don't have this luxury of, writer's block, which I think is just adorable, that we're the only profession that actually has a condition described, just not getting to work. And you gotta learn not to be precious about it. Imagine if, as a newspaper columnist, you were to phone the city editor and say, look, the Muse didn't strike. I just can't do it today, and they'd say, well, why don't you not do it at another paper? So what newspapers teach you is to produce. And so when I sit down to go to work, in the morning, my goal is I want to get 1,500 to 2,000 words done today. And that's just the way it is. So I think work habits and work ethic, it would kill me to miss a deadline. I would never, all the books I've ever delivered, I've delivered probably weeks, if not months early, because you just don't miss a deadline. And that's the absolute ultimate sin in newspapers, is missing your deadline, being late, making the paper late, getting it off the composing room floor. But I also found, I think the other thing that impacts is that I don't try to write to impress. I write to convey information and to make it read clearly. All the thousands of newspaper stories that I edited and tightened them up and took out all the excess jargon and all the acronyms and all this crap that made it hard to understand. And so I think all that sort of stored history of how I worked in newspapers is certainly comes to the fore when I'm writing a novel. I'm not going to give you long-winded, paragraphs of description of what the house looked like as the detective drove up to the front door, because nobody reads that crap anyway. I'm just going to try to tell you the story and tell you what people are saying and keep all that other stuff to a minimum.
So how do you get yourself into the mindset of characters that, let's say, you don't necessarily relate to or understand or haven't had much experience with?
Well, I think I could still get into the heads of characters who are, not nice people. And the thing is, all characters, I think, for the most part, no particular character is all good or all bad. Everybody's a kind of mix, and is kind of 60% good or 80% bad or whatever. And I can, even if I haven't the experience of, a Jack Reacher and write from that point of view, I think that I can get into the head of people with different personalities. And the reason I like to know, for example, what the big picture is in a book, I want to know who did it. I want to do everything I can, if it's that kind of a book where, the criminal perpetrator is a mystery. I want to, when I write dialogue for that character, I want to get in their head and I want to know if they're lying. Nobody else, the reader and the other characters, they're not going to know. But when I'm in that character's head and jumping from one to another, I want to know what they're thinking and whether they're lying, what they got something to hide.
Oh, I was going to say, so which perspective do you like to write from then? Which character, or do you do it from an outside looking in?
Well, generally all the books have one sort of primary character. It's funny, we talk about sort of point of view. Probably the first 7 novels that I wrote were all first person. I found that by the time I got to book 8 or whatever, I started to find that limiting, because when you write an entire book first person, you never get to spend any time with the other people when that character's not around. And a lot of times what they're up to is really interesting. And it's also very interesting from the point of view of the reader to know what they're up to and your main character doesn't know. And so I started switching things around, and I was writing books that were first and third person, first person chapters, and then third person chapters, which I thought, well, you can't do that. And then I wrote, well, if James Lee Burke can get away with it, and if Harlan Coben can get away with it, so can I. And so, but the last couple of books, I think, certainly, I'm trying to remember if I will remember you, I think it's first person and third. But I'm kind of now, my books are sort of first and third, or just all third person. But I haven't written an all first person book in a long time. If that sort of, so the main point of view is going to be sort of one person, but a lot of other people are going to join in at some point.
Well, you took my question, because I've been debating that since I started my latest book. I started all first person, and I said, I gotta go. So I wrote all third person before. I gotta do third person. In fact, that's why I started writing today in the Coben style. What does the first person POV give you that the third person POV doesn't, and the other way around?
One thing that's great when you're writing first person is I find that you can be sort of more casual, more offhand. You can just write in a way that people speak. You can just, it's as if that person is actually telling you the story. They're sitting there and they're talking to you. And so you can do a lot of sort of quick verbal shorthand. You use offhands, you can do asides, you can do all this sort of stuff, because you're writing it the way that person either speaks or thinks going on in their head. And that part I love. When it's third, you can do that to a point, but there's that one step removed. You're not completely in that person's head. You're just having a bit of distance. And I mean, that can be a good thing if you don't want your reader to know perhaps everything that's going on in your main character's head.
What's your theory on the types of books you write on letting the reader know more than your main character, what's going on in their story? Like, the main character doesn't know who did it, but the reader does.
Well, even the reader, I would hope, doesn't necessarily know who did it, but he knows that the reader knows stuff that's going on that the main character doesn't. And that, to me, allows you to build suspense. You can see these forces that are gathering against him or her. You can see them, what they're plotting, see what they're doing. You can see what they're capable of. And so when you step back to your main character, what you know that he doesn't is you're going to come up against some really bad people who have no compunction about, doing very, very bad things. So I think that builds for the reader anxiety and suspense, knowing something that the main character doesn't. I mean, what's that? I think it's a Hitchcock thing. And I think it goes back to when he was doing that movie based on the Secret Agent, the novel by Conrad. It's the kid on the bus who's got the bomb. Now, if a bomb just goes off in a book or in a movie, there's a moment of shock when we're just like, oh my God, a bomb just went off. But you didn't know there was going to be one, but it blows up and you're shocked. But let's say there's a bomb and it hasn't gone off yet, and the bomb is sitting on the bench next to the kid, and there's a bomb, he doesn't know there's a bomb, and that, there's a shock and then there's suspense. Something bad could happen soon or at any moment. That, the main character doesn't, and that creates this incredible sense of anxiety. I love going for whenever I can. And I love that in a movie, when something that they don't and you're just waiting for it to happen.
Your dialogue with characters, how do you see that? Like, how do you feel your characters? Do you hear them? Is it like watching a movie? Do you interact that way and that's how you do the dialogue?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to write is the dialogue and just listening to, and you can tell so much about character by what they say and how they speak and whether they're smart ass or whether, just the manner in which they talk. And so I love dialogue, and I'm always going back when I do revisions. I always find that the dialogue gets tighter. I start throwing out words because people don't say those words. They don't talk in full sentences. And so writing dialogue is to me is the most fun part. I have dabbled, I dipped my toe the last few years in screenwriting and enjoyed actually writing because you had to make every single word count, and there'd be a reason why it was there, and it had to sound real. And I loved that. And I mean, there was the masters of dialogue, people like Westlake and Elmore Leonard and so forth. I just got the new Ace Atkins book, and I haven't read it yet. But I mean, if there's anybody who writes better dialogue than Ace, I don't know who it is. And so you're always trying, to hit that kind of mark. People who were that good at.
Do you find it difficult writing any female characters?
I used to. For a long time, I didn't do a female character as the main character, and I'm doing that more now. And so I would say I don't feel that I have a lot of trouble with it, but I don't think I would be the one to judge. I think it would have to be female readers who would read it and say, yeah, you got that wrong, or whatever. But I try as best I can to get into their heads and write from their point of view. And like I say, it'll be up to others to judge, I suppose, just how well I've done it. I'm the main character in Look Both Ways. That's Never Saw It Coming, and the book that I've written for next year, which is tentatively called Pirate. Those are the main characters in those. The predominant point of view is a woman's.
I know you're a proponent of reading. Any successful writer is a reader. Do you read outside the genre? The suspense genre. If you do, what do you read to help you become a better writer?
I probably read. I almost think I might read at least maybe more outside my genre. It depends on what. I mean, I tend to read crime fiction and thrillers. I read people who I think are way better than I am, and so there's no shortage of people, and so I'm looking for people who I think are really great. Who can write crime thrillers but are great with character. Like a James Lee Burke or an Ace Atkins or a George Pelecanos. But I also read, I'll read other stuff. I'll read the new John Irving when it comes out, or, I read the occasional political doorstopper or nonfiction book. If there's a new Richard Russo, I'm on it like crazy. There's a Canadian writer, Emily St. John Mandel, I think is just genius, and Anne Patchett, who I love. I just finished reading last week, the Irish writer Colm Toylan, who wrote Brooklyn, had written a follow-up novel called Long Island. I think Long Island is the best book I've read all year. So I read an awful lot outside of my genre, and I would hope that that'll make the thrillers that I write, because these other writers are people who really are strongly focused on character, as much or more than in plot. And so I'm there was a time when the only thing I read was crime fiction. Certainly in my teens and into my 20s, that was all I was reading.
Do you think when you go through each one of your books and you go through that whole process of writing the book and, living in and out of the characters' heads and the dialogue and all that stuff, do you think something like that process changes you?
You mean that it somehow evolves from book to book, or that?
Yeah, and also yourself and how you, let's say, attack or approach a book. Does that process change after you've lived through a book?
That's a really interesting question. After I finish a book, it's more like just collapsing, and you think about what you learned later when you start the next one, and it seems like every book I write. I learn from every book. I think, I won't make that mistake again, or I won't do that with a character, or I won't do that plot thing. And then you go on to the next one, and you think, I won't make that mistake again, and you can make a new one. And so I'll make a new one. So I feel like I'm always learning. And I do find that sometimes the process has evolved, has changed. I mean, I always used to just write an entire first draft and then go back and spend a couple of weeks tweaking it. And the last book that I wrote, that I delivered about a month ago, I think I went back and did the tweaking 3 times before I'd finished it. And that was totally different for me to do that. But I was, a third of the way, or halfway through the book, and I thought, I want to add some more nuance to this character. I want to alter this bit of plot, and I'm not going to wait until I get to the end. I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it now. And that was different for me. And so some of the process, I think, has, how I'm going about it has changed over the years. Certainly, I was going back about 14 years. I remember after I'd had an immensely successful book called No Time for Goodbye, which was the single best-selling novel of the year in the UK in 2008, did millions of copies, or has since. I had already written another book after it. The one that came after, I was writing that novel, and all the time when I was writing it, I thought, well, I know there's a problem with this and this, but I'll fix it when I get to the end and I'll go back. And I finished that first draft, and I gave it to my agent, and she read it, and she said, wow, what a holy mess this is, she said. And she said, knowing how quickly you write, and I can usually do a first draft in 2.5, 3 months, knowing how quickly you write, she said, you could write another book from scratch in less time than it would take to fix everything that's a problem in this book. And so after taking a couple of days and making just debating whether to step in front of a fast-moving bus, I started another book. And I never went back to that book. I never tried to fix it. But I didn't feel bad about it because it taught me a really valuable lesson. And that was when you're flipping along, and if you feel there's a problem, stop. Stop and figure it out before you go any further. That served me really well. It's like if you go on a trip and it's going to be a 10-day trip, and on day 2 you hit a fork in the road and go the wrong way. That's going to be a real problem. If you hit the fork in the road on the 10th day, you haven't got that much to go back and fix. But it taught me a real good lesson. Not if it's not working, if you listen to that voice. And so I've learned.
So it's a lot about feeling. Like your cutoff point, it's the same thing as when you're done. Do you know what I mean? And you stop going back.
Yeah.
It's a feel thing. There's not really a way you could tangibly tell someone.
Oh yeah, all of that's so true. I mean, everything about what we do is a sort of feel thing. Does this feel right? Does it feel believable? Does it feel, I hate this is always a cliche, but does it feel organically right? Does this feel like it could really happen? Or am I trying to jam a round peg into that square hole just to make it fit? And if that's what you're doing, readers will see that, and we've all read books like that where, they just made it fit even though it wasn't right. And, people see that. And so I try to avoid that as much as I can.
Because I write a lot of nonfiction. So for me, I don't really have a choice on how it's going to end and who does what and what the kind of characters are that you're dealing with. It's more about learning them and displaying them. You get to give sort of a sense of justice, almost like the Jack Reacher or somebody where they beat up the bad guy. So in a sense, where do you draw the line on how far you'll go to create that justice?
You want the readers to have a sense of satisfaction at the end. Although I've done a couple of books where I love an unsettling ending. I mean, we both mentioned a short while ago about the end of Invasion of the Body Snatchers and that scene with Donald Sutherland. I mean, that is a very deeply, troubling, unsettling ending. And while I haven't done any as unsettling as that, I like an ending that leaves readers a bit off balance. That they learn something right at the very end that they weren't expecting, that leaves them a sense of, well, what the hell are they going to do now? And I don't do that with every book by any means, but then with 2 or 3. But I think you need to give them enough that, there's most of it is resolved, that they have their answers. But once in a while, I like throwing a curveball, and that may mean that justice isn't entirely served, that maybe someone who deserved to have some sort of a reckoning doesn't get it. And because, because that's the way the world is. Not everybody gets their just desserts, and sometimes that's the way your story will finish.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, really. You got a way of everything in your life, right?
Yeah. I didn't realize. So listen, are you doing social media? Do you have a website? Do you like to interact with readers and people that buy the books, or do you hide out?
Oh no, I refuse to call it X, but I'm on Twitter quite a bit. I have a website. I've got a personal Facebook page and an author Facebook page. And my publishers have set me up, of course, on Instagram, but I just can't figure Instagram. I mean, every time I go in and look at it, it disappears. My son's on Instagram. My son is a miniaturist and an artist, and he'll post all this stuff on Instagram, and my wife will hand me and say, hey, look at this. And by the time I look at it, it's gone. Where does it go? I don't understand it. It's like that and where elephants go to die. Stuff just vanishes, and if they try to get it back. So my publishers, if they want something on Instagram on one of my lists, I let them do it because I can't figure it out. But I am feeling some pressure to maybe do a little more in that regard. But I'm quite active on the other sites, and I'm very good at doom scrolling, at looking at all these terrible things that are happening everywhere in the world, and just thinking, you know what, maybe I should just go back to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, especially on Twitter X, boy. Yeah.
Such a cesspool. I don't know why. I signed up to these other ones, whether it was Blue Sky, and when it says, yeah, I'm out of here, I'm going to go to those. And I was on it for a while and thought, wow, I've got like 4 followers now. And it just wasn't catching on, It's just, so I haven't made much progress over those.
No. Do you care about reviews then? Do you actually go into reviews and start looking at them, or do you just kind of look at the overall picture and walk away?
Look at the overall one. I mean, I used to be more troubled by negative reviews. And now you just know you're going to get them. You're going to get some good reviews, you get some bad reviews. I mean, it was Harlan Coben who I thought had the best comment. He said, you know what kind of authors don't get bad reviews? Unpublished authors, he said. And when you create something and you put yourself out there, you're going to get criticism. And some of it is helpful and some of it's not. I think I like the Amazon reviews most, that you get a 1-star review because it was delivered late and one of the pages was, I love those. I got it. So I wrote 2 thrillers for kids a few years ago called Chase and Escape. And a woman picked up one of them and thought it was for an adult reader, but it wasn't. She didn't read the cover carefully enough. She didn't realize it was for kids, so she gave it 1 star. Now, that's like giving 1 star to a frying pan because you thought it was a broom. It just didn't make any sense to me. So some of these you just have to have to laugh.
Yeah, that's how it is.
But thanks for buying the book.
Yeah.
One time at Fillerfest, they had a contest about to submit your all-time worst Amazon review. And I came close to winning. I think I was at 2nd or 3rd spot, which was about my Zach Walker books. This character, and this woman said, this reviewer said, I hated this character so much that I was hoping he would be killed by the 2nd chapter. And of course, he was the first-person narrator, so that didn't work out. But the review I loved the most was one of Lee Childs, and a reviewer said to him, I have read and hated all of your books, but I hate this latest one the most. And I thought, you read and hated all of them. Now, it's just,
all the way to the bank.
All the way to the bank. I mean, when I was a newspaper editor and I was in charge of a department, we had a very controversial columnist, and a guy phoned me one day that was in my office. He phones me up, and his author's name was Michelle. And he said, I hated Michelle's column on Friday. I hated her Monday column, but the one I hated most was the one she wrote on Thursday. And I thought, you read her every day. That's all we want from you.
There's something about the nature of that, because in LA we get a lot of that, where people will write about the show and say, I remember, they'd write on Monday how much they hated the show, and then Wednesday they'll write the same thing, and then the next week they'll say, you guys are just terrible. Why do you? And I'm thinking, well, why do you keep listening?
No, I know. It's hard to figure, but God knows we appreciate it. I had a guy one time send me an email at the newspaper when I was writing my column, and he said, how does the Toronto Star justify cutting down trees and turning them into newsprint to publish the kind of crap that you write? And I wrote him back and I said, I share your concern. I am so appalled that the paper continues to publish my columns that I have canceled my subscription.
Yeah.
And he wrote back, he said, well, thank you for your honesty. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's all you can do,
Yeah.
That's, just the Andy Warhol thing, when critics said he was bad, he was like, yeah, you're right. I'm terrible.
Yeah. The thing is, if no one ever hated what you wrote, there probably wouldn't be anybody who loved it either. And if you wrote something straight down the middle where you didn't want to offend anybody on either side, you'd be writing pablum, and it wouldn't be worth reading.
You'd be easily forgotten then.
Yep.
Well, this has been amazing. We really enjoyed talking to you.
It's been a pleasure.
And the book, I Will Ruin You, a novel. And who else? It's Linwood Barclay. So thank you for coming on the show.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Thanks.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.